So we've talked about the idea of responsibility to protect, the idea invoked by Norman Finkelstein, you know, as his explanation as to why apparently Hezbollah should be lauded for their living up to the ideal of responsibility to protect, to intervene and prevent Israel from genociding the Gaza Strip, so he says.
It was the Russian Red Army under the leadership of Stalin, who was a brutal leader, that defeated the Nazis. In Europe, which you're familiar with, all the underground resistance to the Nazis in the occupied countries, without exception, those resistances were led by the communists. The communists were very brutal, but they led the resistance to the Nazis. In the same way, the Hezbollah is now leading, even though it's been significantly degraded in its military capacities, it's leading the resistance to what is a genocidal regime. In my opinion, peers, and of course reasonable people can disagree, but my memory goes back as far as the early 2000s, when all the liberals in the world adopted this program called R2P, Responsibility to Protect.
And it seems kind of interesting that the very kind of pro-Palestine camp who, you know, revere the every word of Norman Finkelstein, is creepy cult of followers. They never stop to consider that Israel itself was founded by, a movement that essentially, when it came to the Second World War, when it came to the Holocaust, and when it came to the horrific anti-Semitism in Palestine, it was the Jews and the Zionist settlers that, in the founding of Israel, actually lived up to the ideal of responsibility to protect. They lived up to the ideal of responsibility to protecting their fellow Jewish brethren who were suffering in Europe, who were suffering at the hands of the Nazis. And the Arabs, the Palestinians, were completely on the wrong side of that. The Arabs were against the idea of welcoming the Jews to Palestine. They did not at all live up to any ideal of responsibility to protect. That didn't come into it at all. That didn't come into it at all, really.
According to the Mufti, the Jews who were demanding British protection to pray in peace at the Western Wall without being attacked by Muslims were actually seeking to destroy Al-Aqsa. The Western Wall, the Mufti insisted, was simply the Jews' first step in conquering Al-Aqsa to rebuild their ancient temple. Between 1928 and 1929, Husseini worked to limit Jewish access to the Western Wall. On the eve of Tisha B'Av, in August of 1929, 10,000 Jews gathered at the Western Wall to pray on the most mournful day on the Jewish calendar. The next day, hundreds marched to the wall to protest against the British failure to protect Jewish worshippers from increasing attacks by Muslims at the wall. Their march was peaceful, but Arab leaders and the Arabic press claimed otherwise. Rumors quickly spread that Jews had raped Muslim women and cursed the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, none of that was true. Yet the truth had become irrelevant. In sermons at Al-Aqsa on August 23, 1929, Islamic clerics called on the faithful to defend Islam with their blood. Armed worshippers flowed from the mosque and down to the Old City, where they attacked Jewish passers-by and set fire to Jewish businesses. The riots quickly engulfed Palestine, killing 133 Jews and wounding 400 more. The Jewish communities of Hebron, Gaza, and other locations throughout the country were evacuated by British forces. Yet the Jews of Hebron, the haven of coexistence, paid the heaviest price, suffering more brutality and more casualties than any other community in Palestine. Refusing to believe the warnings ahead of time, Jewish leaders in Hebron had rejected offers of protection from the Haganah, the underground Jewish defense force that would later become the IDF. When members of the Haganah visited Hebron days before the riots erupted, they were told to leave. Our Arab neighbors are our friends, the Jewish leaders of Hebron insisted. They did not believe or want to believe that their friends and neighbors would turn on them. After all, the Jews of Hebron in 1929 were not Zionists, building a Jewish home and building the foundations of a Jewish state. They were pious Jews living a quiet existence centered around the Torah. That the massacre did happen there was a turning point for both Zionism and the conflict itself.
And it's hard to escape a sense from after reading Odina Swartz's book, that not only did the Palestinian leadership, not only was it kind of cruelly indifferent at best to the Jewish victims of the Holocaust. Not only was it indifferent at best to the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, but its petty unwillingness to compromise basically did not serve the interests of the Palestinian people. They were uncompromising to the point where they ended up essentially pushing the country to war with the Jews, to a civil war with the Jews that could have otherwise been avoided by a bit of compromise, and which ultimately the Palestinian people suffered the worst brunt of. They were worse for it. And the leadership seemed to not care and seemed to take no responsibility.
So the anti-Semitism never left the Middle East. So the Western world progressed beyond, and had the whole Holocaust education. This is so bad. And what's so funny and ironic and actually very sad is that this whole idea of progressivism and leftistism, whatever you want to call it, all of these ideals actually developed in the wake of the Holocaust, where there was this whole movement where it was like, oh, that was so bad, we should never do this to people again. And so it's funny that wokeism is now being used against the same people it was inspired to not harm again.
Yeah.
Similar to the UN.
Exactly right. International law is this exactly the same thing.
Let's make sure another Holocaust never happens again, and you're literally supporting the jihadists that are. But anyway, so in the Middle East, that continued on. And that's why you had the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, was meeting with Hitler
in Berlin during the war,
because that was the atmosphere, that was the moment, that was the mood of the Middle East at the time, and that is the period of time also that Jews were coming to Palestine for that exact reason. They were being.
So as a side note on that is that at that time in mandatory Palestine, the opposition to a partition of the land was that no, we should have one land with al-Husseini as the leader. But the Jews were obviously like, he just was hanging out with Hitler in Berlin. There's no chance we're going to let him be our governor. It's exactly why we don't want that stuff to happen again.
Well, what's interesting, and so this is why I say you really have to know the facts of this to understand that the story that is portrayed in the media is bullshit. What's interesting is that people never talk about there were various requests for there were various proposals for partition. The 1937 Peel Commission. What people don't talk about is the 1939 White Papers. And under the White Papers, an offer was made to the Arabs that it would be one land, one Palestinian Arab land, under Arab rule, where 75,000 Jewish immigrants were allowed to stay. It would be subject to Arab rule, government, everything. They would have to allow Jewish immigration to increase, but it was totally at the discretion of the Arabs, and they rejected it.
Huh.
No partition, because they said we won't have Jews on this land.
Huh.
And they still want to say that this is about the land belonging to Palestine or Arabs or whatever they want to say, when this is a land that we know was ancestrally Jewish land, a land that didn't belong to anybody at the time that states were being formed, a land that Jews and Arabs were both living on, a land that there was even a proposal that you wouldn't partition it and it would be entirely an Arab land. And in the height of the Holocaust and the height of anti-Semitism around the world, of course the answer was no, which is exactly why they were being kicked out from everywhere else. And it's exactly the same reason why this war continues today. Mm-hmm. And people simply don't understand that this is a continuation of the same anti-Semitism from the 1940s and 30s and 20s.
And of course that kind of brings us to today. I did kind of, in my video, The Darkness on the Left, I suppose, I did somewhat try and entertain the idea that maybe there were true grievances, there were true injustices that the Palestinians had suffered once, but they had become the beard. Those grievances had become the beard for a corrupt Palestinian leadership today that is heavily invested in being the worst actor in this particular conflict and keeping the conflict going when Israel doesn't want to. Israel's been pushed to make peace and Palestinian leadership doesn't want to, and it doesn't want to de-escalate the conflict at all.
Is the Palestinian crisis a land dispute, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so at all. It's a religious issue, and I asked it's mainly when you see the whole Palestinian issue, their problem is they don't want Jews to survive there. So if all Jews became Muslims one day, they will have no problem with that. So the issue with them is Jews. I asked one day a friend of mine, if all Jews converted to Islam in Israel, will you still have this fight and trouble? He said, of course not. I said to him, then this is not a problem of a land. It's a problem just because they are Jews. So, and when you listen to the Arab media, when you follow the Arab media, when you follow the people who are, it's all about a religious war against the Jews, and they wanted to take it further to apply the prophecies that Muslims will slaughter and kill every Jew in the world. This is one of the prophecies in some book called Al-Bukhari. It's not in the Quran, but it's in a book called Al-Bukhari that's well respected by many Muslims as a source of hadith book for the words of Prophet Muhammad, and there is this, what they dream about is to fulfill this prophecy of killing every Jew.
But the question is, when it comes to Hamas, that ideal of responsibility to protect, it very much comes across as though, Hamas are completely and utterly inimical to the ideal of responsibility to protect. They use their people as human shields. They operate in civilian areas, knowing that their attacks will provoke a firefight in civilian areas or get civilians killed. That kind of thing. Now, the West should understand, a human shield situation, because that's what we faced that's what we faced on 9/11. When Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center with hijacked planes, and it's a suicide attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, using hijacking planes, turning them into missiles, and doing a suicide run at these buildings to destroy the World Trade Center, and to cause significant damage to the Pentagon as well. That was a human shield situation in a very, very extreme, explicit way. It was a case of the planes were used as missiles, the passengers were used as human shields. Al-Qaeda were determined to kill the passengers with them in their suicide run. The hijackers were determined to kill the passengers with them in their suicide run. But because the planes were full of passengers, I think a lot of... I think the American defences were just not prepared for a situation in which they didn't understand that the only way to prevent the World Trade Center from being hit was ultimately... It would have had to involve destroying the planes. It would have had to involve shooting the planes down, knowing that destroying those planes was going to mean killing the passengers with them. But, it was the only way to prevent... It would have been the only way to prevent the greater bloodshed caused when the planes hit the towers. That was a very explicit human shield situation. And it shows how jihadis will operate. Now, the Israelis, of course, have insisted whenever they've got into a firefight with Hamas, or, there's been an instance in which a soldier's been reprimanded for accidentally, causing collateral damage to civilians, Gazan civilians, or, Palestinians in the West Bank being killed as in collateral damage during, when it comes to terror attacks. Israel has always, the IDF have always said, look, this is what Hamas do. They use human shields. This is what terrorists do. They use human shields. They operate in civilian areas. And knowing that, an Israeli, knowing that a military counterattack is going to, knowing that they're endangering the people by, provoking a military counterattack that's going to lead to, dead civilians. And this is something that the Israelis have said for decades, to the point where inevitably I think the left just scoff at it. It's just propaganda. It's just their propaganda spin. It's always their excuse. And it has to be said, if this explanation is given so many times in so many instances in which civilians have been killed, there's been this many instances of collateral damage. Yeah, there comes a point the average person begins to think, okay, this is sounding like an excuse now. It's sounding like an excuse. This doesn't sound like a reason anymore. It sounds like an excuse. It's almost like they've kind of turned it into a kind of meme catalogue of propaganda excuses and propaganda bingo, that kind of thing. Where's the proof that Hamas were doing this kind of thing? They're basically it sounds like just passing the buck, deflecting responsibility, and in a way, I suppose as the left would say, well, if you've ended up killing this much collateral damage in this many instances, it doesn't sound to me like it's Hamas who are cavalier to the citizens of Gaza. It sounds like it's you who are. It sounds like this is a convenient excuse to treat, Gazan life with indifference, if you know what I mean. But the thing is, for those of us who don't understand that this is how Hamas operates, there was something about October the 7th that really struck us. That, October the 7th made it clear, look, there is an evil, provocative act like this can have no result except to provoke a massive war. And Hamas knew this when they engaged in this insane massacre, in this bloodthirsty massacre of a far more powerful, far greater military power in Israel that was going to retaliate to this. That was obvious. It must have struck a lot of people that for Hamas to do this, they really don't care about their people. They really don't care about the well-being of their people. It is hard to imagine any kind of gain from this attack that is going to be worth the carnage to their people. It just seems like an insane act.
I condemn everything that has been caused by the jihadists, and this is not my opinion. This is based on causal reasoning. You kidnap people and you take them to a different place. What other option does a sovereign nation have but to return its citizens? What else? There's only two options here, right? You either release the hostages or they have to come and be rescued. So the fact that Hamas has stubbornly refused to return these hostages means that Israel has no other choice. And so what you're looking at here is Hamas persistently putting the Palestinian people in a position to be slaughtered in this way. And you know what else that's so much worse than that? When people keep coming up with these numbers, 41,000 people killed, why? Why are 41,000 people killed, okay? Why is it not that 41,000 people in Israel have been killed despite all of these attacks? Because Israel invests in protecting its citizens. What does Hamas do? Hamas starts a war and then hides in its terror tunnels, okay, and leaves its civilians, its children vulnerable above the ground to be exploded like cowards hiding in tunnels. So yes, I agree 41,000 is an awful number. First of all, we haven't separated the combatants, but we know that children have been killed, and the children have been killed because of Hamas. Everybody that is being killed is because of jihadists, and there is not one fact that you can make that doesn't start with the jihadists. And when the jihadists bury themselves wherever they are, whether they're in Lebanon, whether they're in Gaza, whether they're in Iran, whether they're in Syria, they are making the people of that nation, the people they are burying themselves amongst, vulnerable to being killed in this way. So yes, I absolutely condemn those deaths, and I absolutely blame the jihadists for that.
And there was the implicit understanding Hamas do not care about their people. They don't care about bringing ruin to their people. Now, Hamas reportedly, by all reports, Hamas have a massive terror tunnel network in the Gaza Strip. They've constructed it for decades. This kind of underground tunnel network, which allows them to kind of pop up and play kind of jihadi guacamole. Pop up, do an ambush attack, pop down through the tunnel, emerge in the next building, take a sniper shot from there. They really have rigged the Gaza Strip to be an ambush zone for any Israelis coming in. And by the reports, it seems like the terror tunnel network, the tunnel network would be sufficient. It's where they keep their supplies, it's where they base their operations. It's why, of course, Israel has to drop the bombs it does to get at the Hamas infrastructure, because it's underground. And presumably it's also where a lot of hostages have been kept. That was always a theory. But that tunnel network, you'd think, would be sufficient for the Gazan people to take, for enough of the Gazan people to take shelter in. And reportedly, Hamas have said no to that. They've said the tunnels are not for the people, the tunnels are for the fighters. The people are to be protected by the UN and the international community, not by us. Now, I have sometimes thought, if Hamas had said, okay, we will shelter the people in the tunnels, after doing that horrific attack, then I've always said it would not make Hamas any less evil in my book. It wouldn't make October the 7th any less evil. It wouldn't make Hamas any less evil. It would barely redeem them in my eyes if they were wanting to protect their own people in the tunnels. But the fact that they refuse to do even that is is baffling. And the explanation given is that what Hamas want, they want a maximum amount of casualties in Gaza so that the world will see the horrors that Israel is inflicting on the Gazan people, so that Israel will be discredited in the international community. That's their reported aim. It seems beyond our comprehension that a governing terrorist group could be that indifferent to their own people. It's like, if they don't care about their people, what are they fighting for? What are they fighting for? just over the land? Is the land more important than the people? It doesn't make sense until you actually, Mossab Hassan Youssef said it. He explained it. It's that you're thinking in terms of a people who are, care about the future of Gaza, care about the future development of Gaza as a strip of land. To Hamas, these are all material things. Life is a material thing. Life and death is just a material thing. All the aims of Hamas are spiritual. They're all kind of based on the idea of the rewards of the next life, the duties in this life to achieve nirvana in the next life. And that this is pretty much why the Gaza Strip has been invested with a lot of international aid to kind of prompt the development of the Gaza Strip, the Gaza Strip. And Hamas have abused all that money on its war with Israel because it is still committed to that kind of holy war. It believes that it has to fight this holy war against the Israelis in order to attain the rewards of the afterlife. And it believes the same for its own people, that those who die in this war are going to be rewarded for their martyrdom in the next life.
So now the situation in Gaza, we call it a human shield situation, a society that has been hijacked by Islamists who don't value life, their purpose in the other life, not in this life. Hence, they want to destroy Israel and they want to destroy all other civilizations. And this is why we don't accept this. Then it doesn't matter what happened before October 7. October 7 cannot be justified as resistance. What happened was barbaric. What happened was savagery. What happened was beyond any imagination. This is what ethnic cleansing and genocide really means. When you kill
Can I ask one question?
communities, wipe them out because of their religion, and ethnic background. What's happening in Gaza not because of the ethnic and religious background of Gazans. What's happening now in Gaza because it's their governing authority choose to make a stupid stunt and wiping out 20 peaceful Jewish communities that they had nothing to do, including kidnapping babies and elders and women. And what is this? We are in the 21st century and we have to stop these savages before they become an empire.
And at the same time, Israel is going to be discredited. They have fulfilled that religious decree of terrorize the infidel, kill the Jews, remove the Jews from the Muslim lands. Once you understand that, you understand that that's just what this society is based on. It's not based on responsibility to protect. It's based on mystical goals of the afterlife. Superstitions. That's what its goals are. And that's what Gazan children are taught every day, that there's no greater glory than to murder Jews.
Those children have an unfortunate reality that they are born to parents who are psychopaths and sociopaths. And no one likes to see children who are killed on either side. But when these children's parents use them as shields and hold their babies up, like we think of baby carriers holding your baby front as a cultural statement that, I'm part of the attachment parenting movement and I love my baby so much I want to carry them. No, they strap their babies to themselves so they can explode them with bombs. Like, that's what they do. They are functioning on a culture that is old, and that is Bronze Age, and it can't be fought with post-Enlightenment weapons and ideals. Maybe from a technological standpoint, but the only solution to this is to completely annihilate them or drive them out. Oh, you want all these people dead? They have to be gone. They can't coexist with Jews. They want Jews dead. Their entire charter is not one of a nation state. Hamas's charter, the PLO, like all of their supposed organizations that represent them, they're not organizations that have a charter and a series of Bill of Rights, effectively. They are an organization with the sole stated purpose of annihilating Jews. They are genocidal, which means that when they say that, I believe them. And the only way to deal with an enemy who refuses coexistence and whose sole purpose for existence is to kill you, is to kill them first. And that is an imperative.
And, you know, October the 7th, I can think, basically instilled a lot of us with the understanding that, yeah, that's all they care about. That this is not a any noble resistance movement. This is a movement that doesn't care about the Palestinian people. This is a movement that's determined to make things worse for their people.
Would you describe what happened in the south of Israel on October the 7th, the murders of 1,300 Jewish civilians? Would you describe, mostly Jewish civilians, would you describe that as a massacre?
I think that we can't understand what is happening, and your listeners won't be able to understand what's happening without understanding how we got here. I agree with the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, who wrote that with oppression, quote, violence has already begun. The violence of the oppressed is by definition a reaction to the initial violence of the oppressor. So if you want to end violence, you must end oppression.
Do you justify it in using that?
To explain how to understand the root cause of violence is not to justify anything. In this case, Israel's 75-year-old regime of apartheid, occupation, and settler colonialism is the root cause of violence. If you want to be ethically consistent, we have to apply the same standards in all situations.
You can't colonize a place. You can't colonize a place that your people have also had deep connections to for 14 centuries, can you? As Jews have and Palestinians have.
And which is very, very difficult for people to wrap their heads around. And a lot of kind of leftist ideologues just don't care. They are so engrossed in their ideology, and they just stick to this kind of the kind of, you know, the whole international law says, you know occupied people have the right to resist, and that's what October the 7th was. You know, this kind of item 3, paragraph 4. It's the thinking of a cult. It's like dealing with I remember watching a documentary on Scientology, actually, in which there were two parents who'd lost their daughters to the Scientology cult, and they said, you know, our daughters came to us saying, we're going to defoo you. You know, detach from your family of origin, that kind of thing. And they said they were quoting paragraph 4, chapter 3, and stuff like that, and it was also robotic. There was no soul to the conversation. There was nothing human about that interaction. It was so inhuman. They were just so cold and brainwashed, and these were not the daughters we remember. This is not how our daughters used to talk until they got brainwashed into this cult.
The indigenous people of historic Palestine are the Palestinians, and the Palestinian people have always included people of different faiths. The Palestinian people are a historically very diverse people, and they have included Jews. Now, Zionism, which is Israel's state ideology, is a settler colonial movement that colonized Palestine and ethnically cleansed Palestine starting in 1947.
Okay.
So that's what we say when we talk about settler colonialism.
Is everybody who signed the letter then, given what you've just said, against the existence of Israel because of how it came about? Or are you interested in some kind of peaceful coexistence? I mean, I know it seems far away at the moment.
I don't think there's anything in the letter which says anything along those lines.
No, that's why I'm asking you. Is that because what you've just said there suggests that they just shouldn't be there?
That's your reading. What I'm saying is that
is it wrong?
Israel's more than 7 decades old regime of apartheid and occupation and settler colonialism should be dismantled. That's my view.
And what happens to Israelis in that dismantling? Where do they go?
Nobody is calling for expulsions. What we're doing is opposing ethnic cleansing. So to invert our peaceful calls for accountability for the dismantling of apartheid, which is a legal and moral obligation that every state has, and that and interpret it as a call for ethnic cleansing is perverse.
And I think in my conversation with you and having read the letter, and many people listening, would absolutely echo the desire for the siege to end, would absolutely echo any move possible to get aid into Gaza as soon as possible, so that people can survive this appalling situation. And in the I don't know the length of time this is going to take, but in the hopefully short term rather than long term, get a ceasefire underway if we can. But I do note, and lots of people have noted, that the letter doesn't really address the massacre in the south of Israel, and you in your response to my question about it, how you would describe that, reveal, it sounded to me, if I'm wrong, please say so, a kind of sort of disregard for that pain. Everybody's suffering here, aren't they? But you've chosen a very particular group to support, and only them.
As I've said, I think anyone who wants to see an end to violence, our urgent moral responsibility and priority must be to prevent the unfolding genocide, as leading scholars are calling it. Anything other than that right now is a lesser priority. So all of us have a profound moral obligation to speak up against what is taking place in Gaza right now.
So the Jewish families and their suffering, in light of what's gone on and is going on with the hostages, their suffering is less than, is it? Less than the Palestinians?
This isn't a game of trying to hierarchize whose pain is worse than anybody else's.
I know, but I'm prompted by your language, not my own. I promise you. I admire your efforts to get help for the Palestinian people. I do, truly, from my heart. But I am discomforted by your attitude to the massacre on October the 7th, if I'm honest.
Be ethically consistent. Everybody has to apply the same standards in all situations, right?
Oh,
That's your point too.
You're not.
International law defends the right of all occupied people to resist, whether that's in Ukraine or in Gaza. Attacks against non-combatants are illegal under international law, regardless of the perpetrator. Our peaceful calls for Israel to be held accountable according to international law are now more urgent than ever. We're calling for ending links of complicity with apartheid Israel. We need to move towards freedom, justice, and equality for Palestinians and everyone else. And we need more artists to speak out.
Okay. And Hamas killed non-combatants as well. You recognise that, don't you?
As I've said, under international law, that's got to be the framework that we apply consistently. Is that being applied consistently in all standards? International law defends the right of all occupied people to resist.
And I think it's the same with a lot of these leftists. But why is that? Why do they insist this? I mean, and why has it been so hard to fight them on this? Well, I guess because the premise starts... The premise is nebulous enough. It's... the premise is kind of framed nebulously enough. This didn't start on October the 7th. Right. And the two implicit points on this are: was the status quo prior to October the 7th sustainable? Or did something have to break? And the leftist will insist this, the status quo was not sustainable, not acceptable. The occupation wasn't acceptable. The treatment of the Palestinians wasn't acceptable. And moreover, that we should never let it be acceptable. And this allows them a certain wiggle room, some of them a certain wiggle room, to say, we object to the policies of Israel because it breeds events like October the 7th. This situation, this scenario isn't sustainable. And in a way, what we're campaigning for is a liberation that will mean that Hamas will not resort to tactics like this again. The Palestinians will not be driven to tactics like this again. That's that's how they frame it.
When you bring it to the point of that this started from the 7th of October, that is the problem.
This war started October 7th.
The issue of this
there was a ceasefire before that.
No, sir. No, sir.
Well, there was.
No, sir. I am very sorry to say that, that Palestinians living the way they were as second-class citizens on their land even, and not just in West Bank.
That's a different question.
Or Gaza.
It's a different question, to which I would say I agree with you.
That is definitively the point.
Rama, I agree with you.
Sir, you oppress a people, then let me finish. If you agree with me, what are you agreeing with?
I want you to answer my original question about how should Israel have responded to that terror attack. It's a straightforward question.
Because
what should they have done?
Your question, by ending the siege, by ending apartheid, by realizing that this is not a sustainable solution to keep oppressing a people. I'll tell you something interesting. There is blatant attacks, like I blatantly kill you. But there is something that we don't realize that hurts sometimes even more, the intangible, the disrespect, the checkpoints. One day at one of these checkpoints, and the amount of disrespect these people have to go through, the fact that at one point in the West Bank, a settler can just walk into your home, waltz into your home, destroy your home, take it, and be backed by a soldier. The utter disrespect of having so much injustice. There was this one Palestinian who said, our heart breaks every day over 100 times. What on earth, how is this sustainable?
But then, on some level, we have to ask, do the left believe in responsibility to protect? Does this pro-Palestine movement believe in responsibility to protect? On the surface, they seem to. They seem to want to stop the Israeli bombs from dropping on Gazan citizens. They seem to want, the Western world to stop providing Israel with the arms to do it, and they're prepared to sabotage military bases to do so. But how much do they really care about responsibility to protect? And this is kind of something that kind of came up when, because if they did believe in responsibility to protect, you would think they would lobby for a better government of the Gaza Strip than Hamas, and to argue that Hamas should be removed from power because they're a complete liability to their people's safety. You would think. But then, of course, that clashes with the whole, no, we believe in the right to self-determination of the Gazan people. It's a cultish mess, basically. And I think this is something that Donald Trump actually pointed out beautifully when he took power. There were two policies that Trump enacted when he was voted in, when he kind of established his administration back in January this year. And there was the feeling when he got in power he was going to actually correct for a lot of the disastrous policies of Biden when it came to Israel and the Middle East and Iran, certainly. And there were two policies enacted. One was a hostage deal, which was a bit of a disaster, but One was a hostage deal, which was there was a hostage deal he negotiated, or there was a hostage deal that he pushed forward, and he demanded that Israel adhere by the hostage demand. But there was also a proposal he put out. He met with Netanyahu, and he laid out this proposal that, frankly, was a very it sounded like a very trollish proposal. Just sounded like Trump being his usual crass self.
The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
And there was a policy where he talked about the idea that the Gaza Strip was that it would be a point of controversy if Israel were to take over the Gaza Strip again. Everyone would be saying, all Israel wanted was to take over the Gaza Strip for the natural gases. That was the plan all along. The Israel's expansionist, Greater Israel project, all this bullshit. And Trump's proposal seemed to be, Israel is not going to take over the Gaza Strip. America is. We're going to take over the Gaza Strip. As a way of deflecting from from the charge against Israel. And he said that we're going to basically, because the Gaza Strip is so devastated and it's barely intact buildings, the entire area is a demolition site in waiting, and it's rigged with booby traps as well. It's very unsafe. He said America's going to have to go in and redevelop the Strip. Redevelop it into a modern day Mardi Gras kind of thing. And he said, while we're doing that redevelopment, that means the population have to be relocated to neighbouring countries, to safe countries, kind of thing. And this caused outrage from the left, who insisted that this was an evil ethnic cleansing policy. But it was so genius, it was such a genius bit of trolling, that it provoked the reaction that really exposed the moral fraudulence of the left. That, they spent a whole year and a half kind of insisting that Gaza was an unlivable war zone, and that the Gazan people were being subjected to a genocide. And yet Trump comes along and suggests relocating them to safe countries, and suddenly the left are dead against it, and saying, no, they should stay in that unlivable war zone where they're being subject to a genocide. How dare you move them to a safe country? Which maybe, they probably have good form for, because it's almost like they're saying, it's like, now, like back in, I think if today, because you get the sense this generation of leftists will probably say, how dare you relocate the Jews from the Holocaust from Europe to Palestine? Because and it made clear, look, either the Gaza Strip is a unlivable war zone, an unlivable, humanitarian disaster zone where people can't get aid, or medical facility, or adequate medical facilities, or adequate aid, because the aid has to come in through into a country where bombs are being dropped, Either that situation is unsustainable or it's sustainable and the Gazan people can live there. Can't be both. This cannot be an unlivable war zone and somewhere that the Gazans should never be relocated, never be moved from. It can't be both, basically. And I think this really really laid bare the fact that the left wing, that this movement don't really care about what's actually best for the Palestinians, or don't care about the survival of the Palestinians. Most would probably ordinarily say, well, they'd have to compromise on the point of, well, Israel wants them gone from the Gaza Strip. I would rather have them go safely to a safe country than be obliterated. But it seemed like now the left were of a position that they would say, no, they shouldn't be moved at all. And they should die where they are rather than be moved to a safe country. We don't really care whether they live or die, just as long as we can grandstand about, a moral principle. In fact, you get the horrible sense that if these activists were alive back in 1945, they would have insisted that, relocating the Jews to Palestine was unacceptable. It was like, no, it would be better if they stayed in Europe and took their chances of being genocided by the Nazis rather than be forced to flee to another country, than being ethnically cleansed from their home. It's ridiculous, and the genius was that Trump's trolling, troll basically exposed that nonsense completely and exposed that we're not dealing with honest actors here on the left. And there was the hope that I thought that maybe this actually might cause people to be taken aback. People who'd never really thought through the... people who had gone along with the left-wing propaganda. Never taking a moment to say, well, hang on a minute. What would be best for the Palestinians? What would be the lesser evil? And are we now going to say, if this was 1994 during the Rwanda genocide, would we start saying that that the Tutsi refugees should not have to set foot in the Republic of the Congo just to reach a safe country? Are we saying that it'd be better if they stayed in Rwanda to be macheted to death? It was just insane, really. It was clear that the whole point was to abuse international law to vilify Israel and nothing else. It was not really even about the well-being of the Palestinians. And I really did hope that would become clear. It would be it would be exposed on a grand scale now. And people would begin to realise that these activists are not reasonable. And they're not really even that concerned with the idea of responsibility to protect. This is just nonsense they're coming out with. Nonsense that the only consistent theme to it is we hate Israel, we hate Jews. Everything the Jews do is evil. And frankly, I would be all for the idea, frankly, at this point, I think. But in addition to this, there was unfortunately the hostage deal that Trump forced through.
This has been an incredibly difficult deal to get across the line, and it strikes me as it's very, very tenuous, and that it could face some severe challenges for this deal to get right through to the end stage, which would be a more positive age of trying to even rebuild Gaza from the devastating attacks it's obviously undergone. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is. If you look at how difficult it has been to get to this stage and how many blocks have been put in the way, it's not unreasonable to think that those who have held up a deal in the past for various reasons on each side might be so uncertain about what has been agreed that they would want to pursue their aims and disregard the ceasefire in due course. But balancing that is firstly the incredible weariness of those involved in a conflict, which often leads to the end of the conflict, the horror on both sides, the horror of Israeli families after October the 7th and waiting for the return of their loved ones, the massive destruction in Gaza that has devastated it and killed tens of thousands, the pressure on those who lead in both Israel and amongst the Palestinians is intense to stop what has been happening, return the hostages, end the bombing of Gaza. And those pressures have combined now, after so long, to create the agreement. But those who perpetuated the conflict, kept it going when there was a potential deal on the table, have not gone away.
So basically, I suppose what I couldn't wrap my head around was how exactly a terrorist government like that manages to rule with the popular consent of its people. I mean, here in Britain, America, Europe, we've had waves of terrorist attacks by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Those have been the main terror groups that have plagued us in the 21st century. And the intention of the terror group, more than anything, the reason why they target civilians and that kind of thing. I mean, when it comes to the Islamists, of course, they have this idea that killing non-believers will gain them rewards in the afterlife. But at the same time, principally why any terrorist tends to target civilians is the point is to undermine public trust in the government. Basically saying to the people, your government can't protect you. Your government, and in some cases to stir up a recurring feeling, a brewing feeling that the government doesn't care about protecting you. It doesn't care about protecting you and your children. And the aim, of course, is to foster a sense of, festering public resentment and hatred of the government to the point where the society will end up effectively destroying itself. The people will rise up to overthrow the government, and it'll be like basically the wave of rage will do the terrorists' work for them in terms of destroying the West, destroying Western society, destroying destroying Western society. And yet Hamas, the Gaza Strip is ruled by a terrorist government that obviously wants to keep the rage, the grievance, the public grievance against Israel going, because there's no better way of deflecting, deflecting from the issues and grievances of the people, the dissatisfaction of the people, than by blaming Israel, kind of fomenting a sense that Israel is responsible for all our woes. That enemy state is responsible for all our woes. It's a way of deflecting the dissatisfaction and the anger of the people from Hamas or from the Palestinian Authority as the ruling governing body. But Hamas deliberately brings war upon the Gazan people, deliberately endangers them, it seems baffling that, well, if this government doesn't protect us, then why would the people be so loyal to it? It's hard to make sense of. And there was, I suppose, the thought and hope I clung to that maybe this time the Hamas had gone so far and brought so much devastation to the Gaza Strip that no one in Gaza would be happy with them in power anymore. That it had come to the point where the population would just openly hate Hamas and openly say so, and openly say, we've had enough, they've ruled us for too long. We want them out of power now, just as badly as the Israelis do. That was the hope, and there were occasions, there were clips floating online that showed that maybe that sentiment was brewing. Where there were crowds saying, we hate Hamas, down with Hamas. And I was watching them thinking, oh, it's working, it's happening. And maybe if the people of Gaza turn on Hamas, then maybe, just maybe, it means the end of this war. It means the end of all this suffering that we've seen for months. Maybe it'll be worth it. You know, because there's no way back from this. There's no turning around from this. And of course, Israel had gained some significant victories. They'd eliminated much of the top brass of Hamas that were in Gaza. The point where it seemed like the epoch of the victory was when they eliminated Sinwar. When Sinwar died, died like a rat. And the Western leftists were inconsolable at the death of that piece of shit, obviously. And I was hopeful. I thought maybe we're approaching that point where Hamas have less and less power. They've never been more unpopular. This war has to end soon, with victory. But then Biden forced about a ceasefire deal that demanded basically demanded that Israel would have to release hundreds of prisoners, hundreds of terrorists from their hundreds of Palestinian terrorists from their prisons in exchange for a select number of hostages every week. They would be returned. Some would be returned alive, some would be returned dead. Hamas didn't even reveal which of the two, how many would be alive or dead. Then Trump got in November, and there was probably a lot of hope that Trump will probably reverse this disastrous deal. He'll probably renege on it and say, no, we're not doing this, bollocks to this. Unfortunately, when Trump got in January, he decided, he forced through the deal, and it was like, well, there's no waiting 4 more years for a better US president to renege this deal. We're stuck with Trump now. We thought he'd be better than Biden. Maybe, but and unfortunately that means he is as good as it gets. And so the deal was forced through. Ceasefire.
One of the criticisms being levelled by members of Benjamin Netanyahu's own cabinet, he of course being the Prime Minister of Israel, is that his pledge was he would eradicate Hamas from Gaza. And the argument is that this deal means that won't be the case. Is this a tough pill for the Prime Minister of Israel to swallow? And I suppose, why has he swallowed it? Is it just he knows the population are weary of war?
I'm sure it is a tough realization for him that the aims he set out at the beginning of the conflict were never going to be realized. Virtually every commentator outside Israel told Prime Minister Netanyahu that his aim of destroying Hamas completely was unlikely, because you could kill a number of those who'd been involved in the terrorist attack, and you could kill a number of those who were militants, but you couldn't kill the ideology behind Hamas. And the likelihood of recovering all the hostages by force of arms was also unlikely. And that has proved the case. The majority of hostages that have been freed since October the 7th have been freed by negotiation. And as Secretary of State Blinken said just last week, the United States reckons that as many Hamas new recruits have been collected by Hamas as those who have perished in the conflict. So neither aim was likely.
And this is when there were clips in Gaza showing kind of, armed militants, younger armed militants saying, we revere Hamas, they have brought us victory. And I just couldn't believe it. I thought, how the hell can these people still be loyal to Hamas that's brought the Gaza Strip so much unbelievable devastation? It's just, how the hell have we decapitated the head of the snake only for the organs to still be alive? And it seemed like, they're more radical and loyal than ever. It seems like, these Gazan youths seem to be far more loyal to Hamas than ever. And it was just, it just didn't map with my expectations at all. But it was such a grim realization of Israel's back to square one now. Hamas are still in power. Israel has, exported so much firepower trying to get rid of them, and how many hundreds of its fine soldiers have been killed trying to topple them. And Hamas are still in power. And at the same time, Israel has lost heavily in terms of its international support. A lot of countries have turned against Israel. The pressure has been on to impose sanctions on Israel to stop it committing war crimes and that kind of thing. And so it's lost out, whereas Hamas are kind of, even though they've lost Sinwar, they seem pretty triumphant and sure that basically they're Hamas still exists. Hamas still exists as a terrorist government, and support for it seems to be stronger than ever. Any turn of opinion against Hamas lost, it seems, or hasn't been enough. Maybe Israel has lost far more than it's gained in this. It's lost a lot of international support. It's lost the Saudi by all accounts, it has lost the Saudi normalization deal. Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, gave this speech in which he said which he attacked Israel and lashed out at Israel and said, you're committing a genocide against the Palestinians and all these children that have been martyred for the Palestinian cause, and we urge you do not trespass against sisterly Iran, which was weird because it was like, prior to this, it seemed like a Saudi-Israel normalization deal existed primarily as an alliance and a buffer against Iran. That Israel and Saudi Arabia seem to share a common enemy in Iran. Most of the wars has been in the Middle East have been between in Syria and Iraq and Yemen have effectively been proxy wars between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The proxies of Saudi Arabia and the proxies of Iran. Saudi Arabia's proxies are ISIS and Al Qaeda. Iran's proxies are Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. But now suddenly it seemed like Saudi Arabia and Iran had been having kind of backdoor chats and negotiations, and now Saudi Arabia was prepared to form alliance with Iran and turn on Israel. And I remember being gutted when that happened. Because I thought this is what Hamas wanted to achieve. This is why Hamas attacked on October the 7th, to sabotage that normalization deal. And they've succeeded. The hope was that if Israel succeeds in this normalization deal, it's going to be beneficial to the region. We can't lose that deal, but it was lost. And maybe I shouldn't have been sad about it, really, because the miserable truth is, I fucking hate Saudi Arabia. I think it's an absolutely vile country. I think it's utterly vile regime, vile country, full of Wahhabi psychopaths. It's the snake's head of Wahhabism. It's a snake's head of ISIS, really. And really, that normalization deal was the only thing that made, in my book, made Saudi Arabia even a slight moral cut above the Iranian regime. Beyond that, both regimes were just as horrible and vile as and evil as each other. But it seemed like Israel had lost a lot, and worse. Hamas could now kind of rest assured that they could do more October the 7th again, and the international community would always protect them from being annihilated. It'd always move against Israel to protect Hamas from being annihilated. Hamas knew this now. The world knew this now. And it was sickening to realise.
I think that in order to understand the conflict between Israel and Palestine, one needs to really, 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 really explore what is underneath it, because there are just 10,000 layers of propaganda and disinformation. And I think that, if you take the narrative as it is on its face, what you're going to believe is very, very different. And I think that to really understand the truth of this issue, you have to understand that, and this is what takes people a while to get their heads around. It is possible that the entire world can conspire against a group of people. And if you don't think that's possible, then how has it happened so many times? Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, even if you talk about just, Nazi Germany, for example, right? How is it possible that England, Poland, Germany, Spain, Russia, the Middle East, all the Arab countries, Morocco, Tunisia, Iraq, everyone conspired against the Jews at that period of time, and you find it so hard to believe that could still be the case, to the extent that it was a mass extermination, That's how far the propaganda and the anti-Semitism went. But you find it so hard to believe that the New York Times is lying to you.
On the bright side, however, the ceasefire might mean that it might give us time to actually address the rot in the West, the rot of anti-Semitism, the rot of this anti-Israel propaganda, in a climate in which it wasn't It was no longer so urgent. The war wasn't a pressing issue anymore. And maybe some of the a bit more sober conversation could get through about this lunacy. The hostage deal. Okay. On February the 8th, 2025, El Kalabon basically described the grotesque spectacle of the first hostage exchange. She said, "Today, Israeli hostage Eli Sharabi was Today, Israeli hostage Eli Sharabi was returned. Hamas killed his wife and 2 daughters, pictured below, as well as his brother in captivity who was kidnapped with him, and they also shot and killed his dog. As you can see from Eli's physical health, he almost did not make it also. When they found his murdered wife and daughters, they were huddled in their mother's arms as though she was trying to protect them. She died trying to save them. As Eli is being released, Hamas forces him to tell the world that he is happy to go back to his wife and children whom they had not told that they had killed, as a form of psychological torture, while his abusers parade him on a public stage with a certificate for his time in captivity, and the world looks on, indifferent to the sickest, darkest Black Mirror episode of reality. Not only that, but 9 wounded hostages were exchanged for 112 terrorists who had committed at least 1 or more acts of murder, meaning not only do the hostages have to live with the fact that they were kidnapped and their families were murdered by terrorists, they are forced to serve as the bargaining chip to exchange for the same terrorists that have killed their families and friends. I will never forgive anyone who used the terms resistance or liberation movement within 100 miles of Hamas. There is no equivalent to the evil of radical Islamists in our time. None. If you are so sure you're on the right side of history, explain it to your maker. To those of you who said never again after the Holocaust and wondered what you would have done had you been alive, your silence as Jews emerged from the Auschwitzian terror tunnels is your answer. That was a grim moment. It's like the previous year, there have been victories for Israel. So many kind of glorious victories for Israel to celebrate. There have been glorious victories in this. There was the rescue of the 4 hostages in May last year.
On the morning of June 8th, Israeli commandos made their way into Nusayrat, in central Gaza, to conduct a covert rescue mission. The raid freed 4 hostages and was a critical moment in the now 10-month war, which Israel said it launched in part to rescue more than 200 people abducted by Hamas during their October 7th attack. Prior to this operation, only 3 had been freed by force.
4 Israeli hostages were rescued alive by troops from Hamas captivity in a daring operation in the central Gaza Strip earlier today, the military announces. The rescued hostages are named as Noah Argamani, Almog Miajan, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomi Ziv. All 4 had been abducted by Hamas terrorists on October the 7th from the Supernova Music Festival near the southern community of Reim. Special forces had simultaneously raided 2 Hamas sites in central Gaza's Nusayrat. At one location, Armagani was rescued while Miajan, Kozlov and Ziv were at the second location. The rescued hostages are all in good condition according to initial medical assessments. They were taken to Tel Hashomer Hospital for further evaluation. Amid the operation, heavy airstrikes were carried out in the area against Hamas sites and in support of the ground troops. Hamas health authorities reported a large number of casualties. That absolutely brilliant, hostage rescue operation that Owen Jones, of course, whined about, because it's like, oh, but 271, some 200 Palestinians were killed in the crossfire during that operation. Were those 4 hostages really worth 200 plus lives? It's like, get fucked, Owen, you piece of shit. When it comes to the hostages, I can't be a hypocrite about it. I was never I was not one of those who held out hope for the hostages. I just had this kind of cold, hard-headed view that if they were being dragged into the Gaza Strip, the Gaza war zone, then they had to be considered expendable, just like the civilian population of Gaza. They were likely to end up as collateral damage in this war, as casualties of war. I didn't see much hope of rescuing them, and I felt the imperative was just to destroy Hamas and not even stop to think about the hostages. I didn't wear the yellow ribbon for the hostages. I tried my best not to think of them at all, really. I thought what was imperative was destroying Hamas. It was better men than me, like Douglas Murray and Mossab Hassan Youssef, who kept the hostages, who kept up hope, kept on reminding people about the hostages, who kept up, hope of who kept up who kept alive the name of the hostages, and kept up the hope of their rescue, and lobbied for their survival, for their rescue, and for their release. It wasn't me, it was them. They, Douglas Murray and Mossab Hassan Youssef, when he reminded Ramazan on Piers Morgan, who said, if you want to talk about, the way Israel treats children, why don't you talk about what Hamas did to baby Kafir, when that baby who was abducted on October the 7th is now experiencing his first birthday in a Gazan dungeon. How barbaric is that? How depraved is that? What kind of depraved terror group does this?
Sir, you say that you use very big terms. How would you then describe the slaughter of 40,000 people and away from Gaza? I want you to explain to me, how is it that you find it normal and what you expect of a child that is taken and kidnapped from his home, from his family, from the West Bank?
Okay.
Is it normal that you have children being charged with under military law? Is this something you believe is sustainable?
Okay, let me give the final answer to Mossab.
Well, are you talking about baby Kfir, whose first birthday was in Hamas captivity? Is this the child you are talking about? Because Israel does not kidnap children.
I'm talking about thousands of children, sir. No,
policy.
They do, sir.
Even there is no such thing as thousands of children. The entire Palestinian prisoners, they are
no
not
such thing
even
as a
in
child,
the
it
thousands
seems,
to
in
say
your
that.
eye.
Mostly children. And please, when you say war crimes, you're just repeating like a parrot whatever they told you.
I'm not the one who kept the. I didn't keep hope in the return of the hostages at all. Obviously, I would have wanted it to happen, but I decided to be hard-headed about the prospect that it might not happen. The hostages had to be considered expendable in this war, basically. And maybe it helped not to think of them. But, like I said, Douglas Murray, Mossab Hassan Youssef, they kept the name of baby Kafir alive and kept up the hope in baby Kafir's rescue. And when there was that operation, that operation in the refugee camps to rescue the 4 hostages, that was a triumphant moment. And it was like, it almost felt like in a narrative sense it was almost building up to a grander victory. And the death of Sinwar was another grand moment of victory. And it felt like there could be no... What obviously Douglas Murray and Mossab Hassan Youssef were keeping alive was the hope that, and what many Israelis were keeping alive was the hope that there could be no better happy ending to this nightmarish war than the rescue of the Bibas babies. Rescue of Kafir and his older brother Ariel Bibas and their mother Shiri Bibas, There could be no better happy ending than rescuing those babies and their mother Shiri and bringing them home, and the nation celebrating and being so overjoyed at the rescue of the babies. That all our hopes were resting on the rescue of those babies, and how wonderful it would be to take them, bring them home, and give them a massive, give Kafir Bibas a massive belated birthday party to make up for the one he experienced in captivity. And the thought of, well, these babies are going to be kind of, in the years to come, they would be, these babies would be asked about what it was like in captivity. Do they remember their time in captivity? Do they know that the entire nation was holding their breath in the hope of their rescue? It would have been a lovely happy ending, but it was a happy ending that was not at all to be. Not at all. It wasn't to be.
So, as of today, Israel received back the brutally murdered bodies of a 10-month-old and a 4-year-old, the Bibas children. Hamas gave these back as part of the hostage exchange, wherein Israel decided it was going to send a whole bunch of terrorists who have already dedicated themselves to killing Jews and convicted murderers. Israel decided that it was going to effectively kick the can down the road and release all of these dirtbags. And the only reason I'm not calling them what I think is because I'm trying to keep this relatively PG. Israel released them to get back the bodies of these children and supposedly the body of their mother as well. But it seems that has not happened, and it seems that, of course, Hamas pulled a bait and switch, and that the body of the person in the coffin is not the mother of these children.
it was sickening enough to learn that the Bebas babies were dead. But it wasn't so much the deaths that broke me. It was the parade of their corpses. It was the parade of their coffins to a celebrating crowd of Gazan people, of Gazan families, mothers and children, jubilant at the deaths and saying, it is our victory. They came into Gaza alive and left dead. And they party to Arabic music, dancing on stage. Like, it was disgusting to watch. And Ella Calabon said, there is some indication that the Gazan civilians who broke into Israel on October the 7th were the ones who kidnapped the Bebas family. If such is the case, the same principle of causation applies. On that matter, of the 369 prisoners released last week, other than the 36 convicted of deadly acts of terrorism, the other 33 were those very civilians arrested for taking part in October the 7th, and those were the civilians whom the world felt righteous indignation for their detention, whilst these babies couldn't even get a candle in the wind from the world's humanitarians. There are few words to describe this hellscape of immorality, except to say that, to the Bebas family, I am so sorry that the world failed you. Something changed with me after that parade of the Bebas babies, after that coffin parade. It changed me to watch that, actually. It's been a long war. It's been a devastating war, full of a lot of heartbreaking images. Heartbreaking sights in Israel and and heartbreaking stories, and chilling stories as well. I thought that defending Israel in this war would be easy, because people like Douglas Murray made it look easy. Talented arguers like him made it look easy to defend Israel as the righteous side in this war against evil. Whilst the worst of the activists, the worst of the Palestine activists, made it seem like these people had no moral those people had no moral compass at all, and we didn't have to take their moral outrage seriously at all, because they were perfectly fine with glorifying in the October the 7th attacks as a noble act of resistance or something. So I thought it would be easy to defend Israel, because Douglas Murray made it look easy.
Today, a sea of other stories have come out in the last few days, which have been concerning, I think. For anyone who, like me, believes that Israel has not just a moral duty to defend itself, but has a fundamental right to do so after what happened on October the 7th. And I've said that clearly from the start. It's always been, for me, the issue of proportionality. And it seems that in the last few days, there have been a number of incidents which really question whether Israel is being precise, as it says it is, or indiscriminate. And I would cite the killing of the 3 hostages. I would cite the killing of the 2 women outside the Catholic Church. I would cite the President of the United States saying that they're using indiscriminate bombing, and so on. Do you, Douglas, notwithstanding your full throttle support of Israel, does anything that's been happening make you think Israel needs to execute this war differently?
No, and I think that most of the people who think they know how to execute this war have never executed a war. Indeed, most people who think they know how the IDF should be running this conflict have never been near a conflict. I'm in Israel tonight. I was in Gaza again yesterday. And the examples that you give, by the way, Piers, I don't see why they show any need to prosecute the war itself differently. I mean, just to take one of them, the first example you give, the absolutely tragic, awful shooting of these 3 hostages as they were coming out. But, you know, some of the spin that's been put on that in the world, apart from the glee, of course, that Israel's enemies can't help expressing, some of the spin on that is almost as if it shows the IDF is sort of so brutal that it even kills Hamas hostages who are Israeli. I just think this is another example of the international media and others just having this astounding lack of empathy for the Israeli people. Can you imagine what it was like for those soldiers who were in Gaza, knowing that at any point there were snipers, there are booby traps everywhere, people coming out of tunnels that they've built at British and American taxpayer expenses and attacking them? Can you imagine what it was like for the soldiers who, in that terrible moment, made the life-changing mistake of shooting 3 people who turned out to be Hamas hostages?
But why would they? But Douglas, on that, why would they shoot anyone who was shirtless and waving an SOS flag? I mean, why would whoever they were, whether they were Israeli hostages or whether they thought they were Palestinians, why would anyone shoot anyone who comes out like that? That's my point.
That'll be a matter for the inquiry into it. But look, it's hardly as if they'd have wanted to have done that. What this demonstrates is, in this incredibly close conflict in a heavily built-up area, with people coming out from all sides, firing, shooting, detonating, people make mistakes. Of course they do. That's just a human reality of war, horrible as it is.
When it got to the nitty-gritty of making videos, and I made videos because of that that instinctive sense of, I'm on Israel's side. Israel, Hamas are evil. There's no doubt about it that Hamas are evil. But I think maybe people have it wrong, and people don't understand how evil Hamas are and how in the right Israel is. They think that Israel is in the wrong. They think that Israel is the cause of the suffering of the Palestinian people. Going down that road and having to kind of dissect discussions, particularly on the Piers Morgan show, sometimes it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. And during the editing process, I would find that kind of hard-headed righteousness sometimes would be eroded, from having to watch, the clips, go through the clips again and go through what Israel was accused of doing wrong. If in particular instances where the IDF were accused of making gratuitous kills that were not in line with its precision targeting of Hamas and its attempt to safeguard civilians. I guess it was like I'd taken it upon myself to be a defense lawyer, but I was being presented with evidence every which way that I was finding harder to defend than I thought. Like the Christians in the in that church, like the Christian women killed by the church. It's like this isn't sounding like the romantic, noble IDF I had in my mind, kind of thing. It was all a fog of. I kind of viewed the whole thing as a fog of war situation, a very ambiguous situation, and there were times I thought maybe I'm. What if I become disillusioned one day that Israel has been the nobler side in this? What if it turns out they, so sometimes my defenses of Israel would drift into the apologetic, and because I didn't relish this war. I didn't relish what the children in Gaza had to go through in this, and I felt the only thing I could do for them was pray, and pray that they got lucky in this war. They had to take their chances now that Hamas had set this war into motion, and I just had to hope and pray that enough of them survived this hell. And it was going to be miserable and tragic, but as Mossab Hassan Youssef said, because of Hamas's actions, war was now the only way to peace. But when I saw that parade, I did think about the horrors in Gaza. I did sometimes think about what they were going through. Sometimes I spent days unable to think of anything else. I felt guilty that we weren't. I felt guilty that I was at a distance from it. Couldn't even imagine that. The horrors of the bombardment and all that. I just hoped the war would be over soon. The sooner it was won, the sooner the suffering stopped. But after that parade, something changed in me, and interacting with a lot of kind of being in the circle, in the online circles of social media of people, the social forums where people will say, I support Israel and here's why. There are some who kind of they include kind of jaded former leftists, or jaded former include kind of older jaded voices who used to kind of be fairly left wing, and who will say, you know what, I remember the day when I lost sympathy. I remember the day when I lost sympathy for the Palestinian cause. I remember the day I saw through the whole lie about it being a liberation struggle. I remember one poster saying, the day I realised it was the 2005 it was after the 2005 Gaza withdrawal, when Israel withdrew the IDF and withdrew the settlements, the Israeli settlers from the Gaza Strip, and allowed Gaza self-rule, basically gave the Palestinians their small statelet. And he said, back then I believed, the Palestinians, the displaced Palestinians deserve a state of their own. Just as I believe that the Kurds deserve a state of their own, and the Yazidis do, and and the Druze do, and so many other kind of displaced people who don't have a state to call their own. And he said, and I watched what basically the Palestinians were given their own statehood and their own sovereignty that the Kurds could only have dreamed of. It's like the Kurds could only have dreamed of being given a state like this, and sovereignty like this. And what did the Palestinians do with that state? Oh, they turned it into a base for terrorist operations so they could continue their holy war against Israel. And that's when I realised that the entire Palestine cause was a sham. There was another commentator I remember saying that the day he lost sympathy for he said I'll never forget the day I lost sympathy for the Palestinians. And he said it was in 1985 the PLO hijacked an American yacht and held the passengers as hostage. And among the passengers was a elderly Jewish man who was in a wheelchair. And he said the terrorists shot that man. They shot that man in his wheelchair and threw his body overboard into the water. And he said that was the day I lost my last sympathy for that was the day I lost my sympathy for the Palestinians. I thought, how could they do something that barbaric to a helpless, disabled old man? That was just, it was a barbarism I couldn't get past. It was, I've lost sympathy. No more sympathy, basically. And I think I know what that means now, because to me that parade was the day I lost my last shred of sympathy for the Palestinians, certainly for the Gazan people. That was the day I lost my last sympathy for the Gazan people, certainly. My sympathy for the West Bank Palestinians is barely still there. No. Certainly for the Gazans, it's gone. Because it was such a demonic sight that I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting Hamas to still have this level of support by the Gazan people and the Gazan families after the bombardment that the Gaza Strip had suffered. And yet here they were, triumphant over what? Over the murder of Jewish babies.
They say that Israelis are white colonialists from Europe. And again, it's instantly the racial element, the ethnic element. They see Jews, that they don't belong, even though it's been called Judea for over 4,000 years. Judea. Jews. Judea. Yeah. Anyway, so they don't get that. They also downplay October 7th, like that shitty scumbag actress Dawn French. She had to apologize for it.
That was outrageous.
Yeah, she said, "Oh, they did a bad thing on October, just a little bad thing on October 7th." I watched a Hamas member, after shooting a teenage girl, Jewish, in her home in the gut. He shot her in the gut, and she's writhing on the floor, bleeding out. And then the parents, and he's like, "No." He made the son, the mum, and the dad sit next to it. He started on their Facebook Live. Started filming the girl as she's bleeding from her gut. He shot her in the gut with an AK-47. And then the son is screaming to his parents, and the dad, and the mum's destroyed. But the dad's trying to stay strong for his son. Like, "Son, we're going to get through this." And he's watching his daughter bleed out by Hamas. And they then all got killed on Facebook Live. They just got shot in the face. Another one I saw was Hamas filming on their GoPros. They got into another house in the kibbutz, and there's one of the boys was like 8, his brother was like 10. One of them was missing an arm from getting blown off by a grenade from Hamas, and he was there, the 10-year-old boy, holding his brother's arm. And the little boy, he was trying to tell his brother that it wasn't real. Like, "Don't worry, this is a dream, it's not real." And there's a fucking Hamas guy filming those little kids. And then these people, sorry, forgive me, these fucking people, they try and downplay that like it's a small thing. I watched with my own eyes that mother, Shiri Bibas. She knew what was going to happen to her little. One of them was 18 months old. The other one was 3 years old. Little ginger kids. And the two Hamas guys, balaclavas, guns, they're like parading the babies, and the mother's watching, and she knows what's going to happen to them. And like, this isn't shit from like the medieval period. This is people doing it on Facebook Live, like real. And then for people to have the audacity to go out supporting that every week on British streets, for the government to tolerate it, for the police to facilitate their protest. All I see, Liam, on the streets of Manchester or Leeds or London, where I see these ghouls, is a desire for revenge, retribution, to terrify, to scare. That's why they come out dressing like suicide bombers. It's why they dress like Hamas, the very fuckers who took those babies and tortured them. And sorry to finish that story with the two ginger children. Hamas gave them back to Israel. And they said, oh, they died in an Israeli airstrike. The forensic scientists in Israel, which are probably some of the best on the planet, discovered that the two little babies were strangled to death, and then their bodies were smashed up with a sledgehammer to make it look like an airstrike. But they could tell the constriction of the neck on the little babies.
And, you know, obviously there are those on the left who insist, oh, I bet that forensic report was faked up for political reasons. They just didn't want, you know, the Israeli population to know that it was the airstrikes that killed the Bibas babies, because that would have been, you know, a PR disaster or whatever. You know, even if I was kind of slightly open-minded to that, watching the gleeful behaviour of the Gazans at that parade, the fact there was no remorse whatsoever, that they were gleeful at the deaths of those babies, does not inspire me to be charitable to the idea that that they were not murdered in captivity by these people at all. And in any case, even if they were, you know, we know that Hamas murdered other children on October the 7th. And it was clear that this is something that the Gazan people celebrate explicitly. And it was like, it couldn't have been more brazen now. This is the Palestinian cause. You know, I mean, how a lot of leftists kind of, you know, still continue to frame what Hamas did on October the 7th as an act of resistance against a occupying power, you know, greater occupying power. It sickens me to hear, you know, them continue to insist this, but it's been insisted by the left to the point where they almost had me half believing it. Or rather, no, not believing it. They almost had me thinking, okay, if I was a leftist and I looked, and if I squinted from a distance, maybe I could understand that that's what October the 7th looked like. You know, a guerrilla operation against a greater powerful state that struck a major blow against Israel and allowed Hamas, you know, some bargaining power from the hostages to make its demands and force a greater power to capitulate to the demands of this guerrilla resistance group, if you know what I mean. I could maybe squint from a distance and almost see what they see. You know, maybe they've been so mired in the whole Palestinian struggle that they just cannot tell the difference anymore. But the fact that, there was no way. You know, the strangulation of babies in captivity, there is no way you could frame that as any act of resistance at all. This was, you know, this was the murder of the most vulnerable. The murder of children for what? For being Jewish. They were murdered for being Jewish. They were murdered because their lives were seen to matter less because they were Jewish. And they weren't even kept alive as kind of as a high prize, as a kind of high prize prisoner. It was clear that the whole liberation, the whole resistance liberation was a sham, and that really this is the cause. The cause is just the delight in killing Jewish babies. And it doesn't matter what the consequences to the society will be for it in the war that ensues. That's all the Palestinians want to do. That's all they've been brainwashed to do. Into reveling the idea of killing Jews, waging war against the Jews and killing Jewish babies. And it's like, this is such an irredeemable culture. What I'm looking at is just a society beyond saving, and that's kind of the thing. I think that's why, if I had it in mind that I was kind of having to defend Israel while I was on trial, this was the moment for me where I decided, you know what, the trial's over. There's no case here. Case dismissed. Israel is completely exonerated of all charges. This is a sham case. These are the children that Israel is accused of having killed. Well, it looks like most of these children are jihadists. Most of these children here are indoctrinated sociopathic jihadists. It looks like a society of John Venables. It looks like a kind of a youth generation that's full of John Venables. Just evil kids. And if this is the kind of culture Israel's had to live next to for last 20 years. And I'm supposed to, we're supposed to criticize Israel for not being, for overstepping the mark in its military operations. And it's like, from that point on, it was a case of, it's not that Israel hadn't done enough to save, to prevent the deaths of civilians in Gaza. It was more that this society was just beyond saving. It was beyond redeeming. Completely beyond redeeming. And I thought, well, you know what, if the IDF have an idea of how to preserve, human lives in this hellish society, if they really think the Palestinians are worth saving, then I'll defer to their expertise, because I haven't got a clue how these people are worth saving. I haven't got a clue. It's beyond me how these people are, how these people are even worth saving. And it's like, that was it. It was the end of any trial I had in mind about Israel's conduct. And I felt like these people were never even worth my moral agonizing over. The Palestinians, I mean. It's like, I shouldn't have wasted my time agonizing over a single one of these people. This was an evil society I was looking at. It was an irredeemable society I was looking at. It was the true society of demonic baby killers I was looking at. Not the IDF. The IDF were the good guys who were doing their best to do society, to do humanity a favour and kill baby killers. And moreover, what I was looking at in that footage was in no way at all. These were not remotely... What I was not looking at in that footage was any survivors of a genocide, or any victims of a genocide, or survivors of a genocide. This was not how survivors of a genocide... This was not how victims of a genocide look. This is not how victims of a genocide have ever acted. When did the Tutsis ever gloat about the Hutu babies they murdered? You know, having survived a genocide, deciding, well, we're going to show what a death wish we have to the Israelis. You know, it's like, we're going to show how much of a death wish we have to the Israelis. What victims of a genocide do that? By saying, we killed your babies. What victims of a genocide invite and taunt, you know, more murder, like, you know, more, and taunt for more war like that? And I think at that moment I thought, you know what, I'm ashamed that I was so apologetic in my defences of Israel in the past. And it compelled me, this is what kind of compelled me to make this video. I take it all back now. Israel, as far as I'm concerned, is completely exonerated in everything it's done. And the Gazans, and worse, you know, it's like I said, I think at the beginning of the war, I kept on saying, you know, the Hamas deserve this war upon them, but I don't think the Gazan people do. The Gazan people don't deserve this war, nor do they deserve to live under Hamas's brutality. They don't deserve Hamas's rule, and they don't deserve this war. But they're stuck with both. Watching that parade, I realised how wrong I was all along. They did deserve this war. And they did deserve Hamas's rule. They welcomed Hamas's rule. Still, after all this, they hated Jews so much that they were willing to live under Hamas's theocracy, because they shared in the goals. And I actually thought something. I actually heard myself say something that I thought I never would, which is, maybe Israel's gone too easy on these people. Maybe Israel has let the Gaza Strip off far too lightly.
Mayor Khan has said it best. They must go. They must go. There is no coexistence with them. The last 60 years have shown us conservatively that there is no coexisting with them. If you want to keep having your babies brought back in boxes or charred remnants of them picked up little bit by little bit, then keep along this path of caring what the West thinks. It is enough. Fear God, fear Him alone, follow His word, follow His commandments, drive them out.
Problem is, there was no country willing to take them. Egypt didn't want them. Jordan didn't want them. The only possible place to send them was to Libya, which ordinarily I wouldn't send my worst enemy to. But there seemed no other answer. These scum had to be gotten rid of. To hell with what international law says.
Can I tell you what game I'm no longer playing? After learning today that the Bebas babies were choked to death with bare hands, and then their bodies were mutilated with rocks to make it appear that they died by bombardment. Can I tell you what game I'm no longer playing? I'm no longer playing the what about game. You know why I'm not playing the what about game anymore? Because I'm done pretending that all of this isn't on Hamas. Because on October 7th, when Hamas invaded Israel and slaughtered 1,200 civilians, including children, not just the Bebas babies, we watched it on those GoPro cameras, They didn't just invite a retaliation, they demanded a retaliation. You know how they did that? By kidnapping those civilians, those babies, and taking them back to Gaza. And because they did that, they are the cause of the ensuing war. And I'm going to explain to you why this is true by the principles of causation, which includes but-for cause and proximate cause. The but-for cause means that if it was not for Hamas's actions on October 7th, there would be no resultant war on October 8th. Because Hamas are the but-for cause of the war that ensued on October 8th, Hamas are responsible for the casualties, for the death and destruction that ensued on October 8th. Proximate cause means that those deaths, that destruction would have been foreseeable to Hamas when it committed the atrocities on October 7th. Because that death and destruction was foreseeable to Hamas when it committed those atrocities, Hamas are responsible as a proximate cause for the death and destruction of the resultant war. The other thing this morally confused world can't seem to figure out is that while all deaths are the same, all killings are not the same. Our criminal justice system does not center around death, it centers around killing. Killing is to do with the intent of the killer. So when you say, what's the difference between this and this? The difference is in the killing. Yes, all deaths are the same. They come with the same suffering. They come with the same mourning. They come with the same loss. They come with the same heartache of the parents, of the family. All deaths are the same, you're absolutely right. But all killings are not the same. But all of it, same or not the same, is on Hamas. All of it is on the jihadists that have been doing this to the Middle East for 1,400 years. You're right. You're absolutely right. It didn't start on October 7th. You know when this began? It began in 622 AD. And we, the indigenous people of the Middle East, including the Bebas babies, including the half Yemenite, half Ashkenazi babies, both indigenous to the Middle East, are still paying the price for jihadism. 1,400 years. You are goddamn right. This didn't begin on October 7th.
Do you know what the tragedy is, though? The tragedy is that Ella Colobon used to be pro-Palestine. She used to be one of the strongest pro-Palestine voices on Twitter. You know, there are some old tweets she has put out in which she said, in which she has been critical of Israel, and she has kind of, joined the hashtag Free Palestine. As late as 2022, she was kind of tweeting in support of the Palestinian cause and against the war horrors of Israel. Because I think Ella Colobon truly is very strongly moved by the death of children in any war, and I think when she kind of joined the Voices of the Free Palestine movement in condemning the death of children in Israel's war on the Gaza Strip, it just felt natural to her. It felt right. I do not begrudge Elika for having been pro-Palestine. If she still was pro-Palestine, she probably could be one of the most beautiful and eloquent voices of Palestine out there. But I think she operated under the assumption that no one would ever have to talk about dead Israeli children. It would always be dead. It was the Palestinian children who were always the ones who seem to be dying in these conflicts. Whereas Israel, it was protected by the Iron Dome. It was massively unlikely anyone would ever be talking about dead Israeli children. But she had assumed, I think, that if that day ever came, then her side, were on the side of humanity, would say, yeah, it's just as heartbreaking when Israeli children die as when Palestinian children die. And it should be just as condemned. On October the 7th, and I think it was October the 7th that made her realise how wrong she was and how little regard the world had for Jewish life and for the life of Jewish children and Jewish babies. And it was kind of the realisation I was on the wrong side in this. I thought better of my side. I thought we did genuinely care about the suffering children in war. I didn't realise the whole thing was just a sick agenda, based on a sick agenda to demonise Jews as baby killers and to, utterly dismiss the death of Jewish children being killed by Hamas. She had no idea that the movement was that cold-blooded and sinister all along. She believed in the humanitarian beard of the Free Palestine movement, just like my mum does. And she realised to her horror that it was just a beard. It wasn't the substance. She believed the beard was the substance. It was just the beard. Yeah, the fraudulence of the whole cause, the way that, suddenly it's all about the dead babies until those dead babies are Israeli. And suddenly it's not about the babies anymore. Suddenly it stops being about those dead babies. Because this isn't about the children. This is about anti-Semitism. This is about demonizing the Jews. And I think she feels guilty about that. She feels guilty that she didn't realise that, most of her posts have that tone of, I'm sorry the world has ignored you. I'm sorry I didn't know. I didn't know how much this was about anti-Semitism, really. I didn't know that the anti-Israel rhetoric wasn't just about condemning a government or condemning, a state's actions. I didn't know that it was actually a genocidal hatred of the Israeli people and a hatred of Israeli children. I didn't know. And, I have felt the need, and sometimes, I'm a nobody probably. I'm just a fan of hers. I don't know if she notices my posts much. But I do often try to comment in the section, comment under her tweets, you know what? You are the last person in the world who should be beating yourself up in guilt over any of this. You really are, And I think maybe she still does care about the Palestinian children. At this rate, she cares far more than I do. Because I'm done. I'm just resigned to the fact that, I think she cares more than I do.
So I just got to my hotel in Toronto and I heard the news about the Bibas babies who have now been confirmed dead. And their dead bodies are going to be returned by Hamas tomorrow. And I know that from here on out we're going to hear every single excuse in the book that there should have been a ceasefire deal sooner, and there should have been a hostage deal, and there should never have been a war, and Jews should never have returned to the land, and what about the occupation? Everything. Except the one thing that this morally bankrupt world should have said on October 7th, which is that terrorists should not be kidnapping babies. And it is that failure. Just no. It is that abject failure to do the right thing, to say the one thing that needed to be said from the beginning. That is exactly why Hamas has benefited for the past 16 months, and babies have suffered. Because for the past 16 months that you've been watching these protests out there saying, kill the hostages. Hamas, Hamas, we love you. We support your rockets too. Jews, go back to Poland. All of those 16 months was 16 months that those babies were underground in tunnels relying on you to be their voice. And where were you? Where were you? Where you were was saying, who are we to judge how a people resist? I'll tell you who we are. Who we are is society. We are quite literally the people who judge the standards of violence and morality. That is what we do. But you know what? Based on the past 16 months, maybe you aren't the people to judge. Maybe you are the people to be judged. Because if, as a society, we can't find it in ourselves to say the one thing that counts, which is that terrorists shouldn't be killing babies, and as a result of that failure to say the right thing, these babies, their bodies are coming home dead tomorrow, just know that their blood is not just on the hands of the terrorists that kidnapped them. Their blood is on the hands of a failed society that is against everything except the terrorists that killed them.
And if that hadn't kind of clarified my conscience on this enough, then Ella Labon revealed that she had gotten a horrific, frankly evil message off some Middle Eastern account, private message to her, with abuse and threats, saying to her, you know, I hope the Iranian regime hunts you down and kills you. I pray you are hunted down and killed. I pray, you know, Iran hunt this traitor down and kill her. And you know, it got worse from there. He started saying to her, I celebrate October the 7th. The Jews killed that day were cockroaches. It was so sick. You know, just showed the kind of sick, evil culture we have in the Middle East. And, you know, I do think about my mum who goes on the march, and I kind of think, you know, it's so strange that she's part of the same movement that has sick individuals like that in it. I mean, it's a global movement, I suppose, and my mum is in the safety of the West, I suppose, and she's in the old pacifists block of the march with her pacifist friends. She is, I hope, as far away from that kind of you know, sick individuals like that as possible. You know. And but it's like, well, you know, my conscience was clear before that, it's twice as clear now. This is a movement of scum. This is all bullshit. And I thought, well, there's not much silver lining in any of this. This is unbelievably devastating. I mean, this is... Any one of those deaths would be enough to destroy a father or a husband, but to have lost to have lost all his family. I couldn't actually watch his tribute speech for a long time. I thought it's just too heartbreaking. The only silver lining I saw in this, and it seemed like there was nothing Hamas, that Israel could do now. It had to sit out the entire ceasefire, and it all came down to the inevitable day that Hamas would strike again, because it was clear that the future was rotten. This was an irredeemable generation in Gaza, and the only silver lining I saw in any of this was, well, I know I'm sure now. I know I'm sure I am. My sympathy for the Gazan people is gone. I see now just how rotten and evil they really are. What a rotten, evil culture it is. I understand now what Israel has been saying all along about how you do not understand what a backward society they are. What a Bronze Age death cult you're dealing with here. And it's like, I get it now. I see it now. This is everything you've warned me about. I get it. And, you've been telling me for 2 years. I see it now. And I thought maybe this has to be the turning of the tide moment. People have to look at that parade and see, are these people really victims of a genocide? Give me a fucking break. Are these really people we should be sympathising with? Give me a fucking break. Are we really to believe that the IDF are the baby killers in this scenario? Give me a fucking break. Look what Hamas just paraded before you. Dead Jewish babies, dead Israeli babies, to a fucking celebrating crowd of evil fucking Gazan people.
What I'm about to show you contains powerful pictures, powerful videos, and it is quite simply one of the worst things I have ever seen in my life. And if you're anything like me, you will struggle to put into words your emotions at seeing what I'm about to show you. But I have done my best. Not a single Gazan so-called refugee should ever set foot in Britain. Why? Just look at this. Today, Hamas dug up and paraded the coffins carrying the bodies of Jewish babies and their mother. How did these poor, oppressed, lovely Palestinians react? Those barbarians cheered. They celebrated the fact that Hamas murdered Jewish babies. And look at this. They came out to line the streets to watch those coffins go by, celebrating again. Fathers took their own children in their arms to gleefully watch as dead Jewish children were returned to Israel. But they weren't just returned, no. The Sun has reported that Hamas locked the coffins and didn't provide the keys. Israel had to screen those coffins to make sure Hamas hadn't packed them with explosives. All this talk about how Gaza is impoverished and locked off from the outside world. Well, where did Hamas get the resources to make these horrific giant posters? How did they manage to get them printed, to design them, to get them there? And I'll be honest with you, all those Hamas fighters, they seem very well fed, don't they? They don't look like they've been having any trouble whatsoever getting food. I think today the illusion died. It's something that I've never bought into, by the way, but today, for me, the total illusion died that the Palestinian people, the people in Gaza, are this brutally oppressed group of people who hate Hamas and who are being forced to live under them. Well, I tell you what, how many tens of thousands turned out on the streets today, Matthew, to wave to and cheer at the bodies of Israeli babies in their coffins?
And at first I saw hope that maybe that's what had happened, that this would be the tide turning moment, the moment that turned the tide. Where maybe the narrative on this war would change, and people would kind of question whether the Palestinians were worth their sympathy or not. I began to hope this would be the turning of the tide, where people would wake up to, the tide would turn. Like, the tide was against Israel up to this point, but I thought maybe this is the tide turning moment where people are going to say, hang on a minute. We've been had, haven't we? I'm not going to sympathise with this. I thought that would be the tide turning moment, where people realised which side in this war was actually the true, brutal, cold-blooded baby killers. Because historically it's always been the Palestinians, really, not the Israelis. And quite often in my Facebook feed, quite often in my Facebook feed, there would appear, charity ads for Gaza. Ads in which, and they'd appear on YouTube ads as well. Ads about, let's feed Gaza, let's feed the people of Gaza, let's help the children of Gaza. They appeared very often on my Facebook feed, asking for charity donations to help feed the starving Gaza, help aid workers, feed the starving children in Gaza. And in the first few months of the war, I actually donated to them quite a few times. I thought, why not? I want this. If I can do a little bit to help the innocents in Gaza survive this war, and be well fed as best as possible. If I can play some, I felt okay. That's the right thing to do. I stopped donating, however, after the South Africa trial, where it turned out that, where it was revealed how complicit UNRWA had been in the October the 7th massacre, and how complicit they'd been in harbouring and sheltering Hamas, and in abusing UN facilities. And that was the point where my purse shut, and I said, I'm donating nothing anymore. I don't know where my money's going. I thought I was donating it to help the children in this terrible humanitarian crisis. For all I know, I'm actually funding UNRWA, for all I know, my money would actually be funding UNRWA, who helped start the war and cause the humanitarian crisis in the first place. They're not getting my money. I don't know where my money's going anymore, so I'm not going to donate. Which I felt guilty about to a degree, but it seemed like the only sane thing to do. But you know, the ads would still appear in my feed, you know, all the same. And I responded, but the thing is, I did notice quite a few comments this time underneath the charity ad saying, "I'm donating nothing now," and they mentioned the death of the parade of the coffins of the Bebas babies. Let's see. Someone wrote under the Medical Aid for Palestinians, Medical Aid for Palestine post. I have read about the appalling murders of the baby Kafir Bebas and his toddler brother Ariel. They were strangled and their poor little bodies were mutilated to make it seem like they had been killed by Israeli bombing. The forensic results have been sent to experts in other countries for verification. The children's mother, Shiri Bebas, was not returned on Thursday as agreed, but an unknown body was in the coffin instead, confirmed by DNA tests. A body believed to be Shiri's was sent over by Hamas yesterday and is undergoing forensic examination today. I have seen footage of the coffin handover scene and it is disgusting. A huge, well-fed crowd had gathered by that disgusting propaganda stage, filming the scene with their mobile phones. They were cheering excitedly and Arabic music was playing. A woman kissed the ground and thanked Allah for victory. Not the dignified handover from Hamas that the Red Cross requested. I will never support these depraved, hate-filled barbarians. Hamas must be replaced and the people somehow de-radicalized. And the tone just seemed to be, I'm donating nothing now. They've lost my sympathy. And it was kind of, it's like, you know, it was the same place the sympathy had first come from. You know, the mothers, you know, the kind of the whole thing about, you know, usually the cause has a way, you know, the Palestine cause has a way of appealing to, you know, people across the board. It appeals to middle-aged mums a lot because it obviously touches on that kind of, you know, seeing Palestinian children killed. It's like it triggers the mother, the protective mother approach, the kind of, you know, wanting to protect all the world's children. How horrible it would be if these were my children. You know, children are the most beautiful thing, and it's nothing more heartbreaking than seeing the death of children. But it was like now, it was maybe seeing that demographic saying, well, now I've seen Israeli children returned in coffins and a crowd celebrating. I cannot understand a culture like that. That repulses me, and you know, yeah. Here's a post on the British Red Cross, British Red Cross charity thing. Posted 8th of the 3rd, 2025. Poster said, this is a man saying this now, no mention of the Red Star ambulances. You have cancelled yourselves by ignoring the Israeli version yet acknowledging the Palestinian ones. You ignored the plight of the He said, you've ignored the plight of the Israeli hostages. How dare you? For years I rated you, praised what you did, and thought that you performed an important righteous role in society. Now the true face of the Red Cross has been revealed. A racist, anti-Semitic, cowardly, biased, extremely flawed organisation without integrity, compassion and soul. You have done nothing to aid these fellow human beings in their plight and fight for survival in captivity. On the day that the Bebas brothers were returned to Israel, you reported on a situation in the Congo and didn't mention it once. Your silence has been deafening. Why have you not asked to check up on the Israeli hostages, checking up on their welfare? Where were the health checks? A number of the hostages were seriously injured when kidnapped, yet you didn't do anything to help them. You have participated in the pantomimes that take place when the hostages have been released. Shame on you. I am shocked, yet strangely not surprised that you worded your post including the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, yet ignored the Red Star? Are you seriously going to continue to ignore Israel and the Israelis? Did the 7th of October mean nothing to you? Do you not consider the Jewish people as human? Since when did your agency lose all notion of compassion? After this conflict is over, if indeed it is ever resolved, there must certainly be a day of reckoning for you. People will have the time to reflect on your role in the proceedings and your lack of action in that moment, and you will lose a significant amount of support. I personally will never support you again. There is not a word I can muster that would communicate the level of disgust that I feel for your actions so far. Shame on you. You know, I'm done, basically. And so I was hopeful. I thought maybe this is it. This is, you know, this is the end of any need to defend Israel anymore. It's case closed. What a rotten culture Israel has had to deal with here. And I thought, well, that's it. You know, it's, you know, that's the change. Times have changed, basically. You know, I thought that was it. The end of any sympathy for the Palestinian cause was gone now, and sadly it was at the point where it could only end if sympathy for the Palestinians died. Sympathy for the Palestinian cause had to die, basically. There was no other way. There was no other hope, really. There was no other way out of this madness. What I didn't understand, however, is that the zeitgeist in the West was just... the anti-Israel zeitgeist in the West was just not going to let that happen. Our media class was not going to let that happen. Our media class of, you know, virtue-singing twats, you know, in music and media and TV and film. They'd stuck firmly to the right-on pro-Palestine message. You know, it was the fashionable view for the media class to hold. And they weren't going to change their minds now, and they weren't going to let the rest of the society change their minds either. It was the zeitgeist.
You do not have the right to commit war crimes, to commit a genocide, to kill all those children, and then hide and use as a shield. Oh, everybody's an anti-Semite.
When you have a terror regime like the Nazis who do engage in genocide, unless you finish them off completely and defeat the idea of militarism, that Hamas can achieve its objectives through military objectives and not diplomatic objectives, then you will never have peace.
You cannot bomb it into submission. They're replacing dead Hamas fighters at a rate of 5 to 1. This is going to come back to haunt you for years.
You tell Rabbi Shmuley that he'll burn in hell as well, because obviously he's a shame to Jews. Free Palestine. All right.
Morgan, listen to this. They attacked Israel on the 7th of October. They massacred Jews. What is not clear in what I say?
All you want is to take over the West Bank and Gaza. You want them all gone. That's the bottom line.
As you said, the audience will judge. They attacked Israel on the 7th of October.
Yeah.
They massacred Jews on the 7th of October after we evacuated Gaza for their benefit. What is not clear in what I say?
Well, what is not clear is that you have also, in going after Hamas in Gaza, massacred between 70 and 100,000 Palestinians. And at what point does that become disproportionate? At what point does the fact that you won't, that the Israeli government continues to prosecute this war in a way that kills so many children, does this become something which is completely unacceptable?
Okay, not acceptable. So it's a fact. If they had not, you say that it is not acceptable. I understand that it's not acceptable by you. I think that if the Gazans hadn't started, the Hamas hadn't started the attack, there wouldn't have been a war,
And we, for instance, as people who were evacuated from Gaza, in the past 20 years, I must say it's kind of a unpleasant confession for me, but this is the truth of the matter, that we haven't dealt with the idea of returning to Gaza, returning to our homes, because we said, okay, there was a contract, we gave it away, we didn't want it to happen, it happened, and that's it. The gates closed. Right. That was created here after many years of dispersion.
Okay, and Mrs. Weiss, how do you feel about the fact that over 20,000 Palestinian children have now been killed since October the 7th in Gaza?
I think that the Palestinians, as you said, you see, I said Palestinians, the Gazans and all Arabs around should stop attacking Israel.
Right, I just asked you how you thought about 20,000 children being killed by the IDF. So how do you feel about that?
I think that the parents should be very careful before they teach the children to hate Jews and to kill Jews.
No, that wasn't my question.
I warn the
That wasn't my
Arabs.
question. Sorry to be persistent, but my question...
That was your question.
My question was, how do you feel?
Answer.
My question was, how do you feel? How do you personally feel about over 20,000 Palestinian children now being killed since October the 7th in Gaza? How do you feel about that?
I think that Arabs, Gazans or Jordanians or Syrians, whoever, should be very, very careful with the way they educate the children.
Yeah, that wasn't my question.
Now,
that wasn't my question.
Many of them.
Can you answer my question?
Answer. That was my answer.
So you don't care?
Your question.
You have no thoughts about these children at all?
You choose your questions, and I answer them the way I believe is right.
But just to be clear, you have nothing to say about 20,000 children being killed. Nothing at all.
I have a lot to say about everything that happened as a result of the massacre of the 7th of October.
I understand you care about Israeli children who died, as do I. But I'm able to care about both sides of children who've died. Why don't you care, seemingly, about the Palestinian children who've died? Why can't you express any sympathy or sorrow or empathy with the children who've died in Gaza? Are you able to do that?
I warn all Arabs from all sides, from all borders, warn them, stop educating children to hate
So just to be clear, I've now offered you three times.
I made myself very clear.
Oh, you've made yourself very clear.
You asked me 5 times.
I'm going to give you one last...
You asked me 7 times.
Okay, I'm going to give you one last chance to offer some empathy or sympathy or sorrow about the deaths of 20,000 children in Gaza. Are you capable of doing that?
I can tell you that had you cared, and I don't believe you that you care a tiny bit about one killed person if you do not use the means that you have as a media person to stop educating children.
I gave you 4 chances.
Jews. Okay, you gave me 7. You gave me 7.
And you know what? You couldn't give a damn, could you?
That you are to blame more than me.
You don't care, and all you want is all the Palestinians gone. You can barely even bring yourself to say their name. All you want is to take over the West Bank and Gaza. You don't care how many die in the process. You want them all gone. You don't care, do you? That's the bottom line.
I think part of the reason why I kind of go over, sometimes I do kind of agonize over the videos I make is because I kind of realize it at that point that what's holding me back, what kind of makes me kind of feel trepid is on some level I know that I've entered into an era where there is no legitimate criticism of Israel anymore, or what little of it there is gets abused, weaponized, twisted out of abortion. It's like we're at a point where I'm not sure it's even possible to entertain even a legitimate criticism of the Israeli government now. Because just a drop of legitimate criticism at this point is poison. Just a drop of it is poison now.
Crude Islamic Jew hatred has permeated the Middle East conflict from day one, yet its influence is always carefully omitted from all political analysis. Any doctor who diagnosed an illness as ineptly and dishonestly would deserve to be struck off and prosecuted. Palestinian leaders have had several chances for a two-state solution, and they've always rejected it because they don't want a two-state solution and they don't care about the suffering of their people. They want all Jews out of there or dead. The leader of Hezbollah is on record as saying that he won't be happy until every Jew on earth is dead. Once you realise that this is the position, then whatever you think of Israeli security measures, your moral standpoint has to change. We know that if the Arabs were to lay down their weapons, they could have peace and prosperity for all their people, and the Israelis wouldn't need to build barriers or do anything else the world disapproved of. They could simply get on with what they do best, technological innovation, making life better for all of us, including Arabs. On the other hand, we know that if the Israelis were to lay down their weapons, they would be massacred, men, women and children alike. The Arabs are even happy to put their own children in the firing line to attack Jews. They hate them so much. And this hatred comes directly from their religion. Just look at the mess they've made in Gaza, which is now a hardcore Islamic hellhole. The Israelis used to be in Gaza, but they gave it up for peace. They uprooted thousands of settlers and gave the land to the Arabs for peace. And what did they get? They got war, of course. Gaza immediately became a launching pad for hundreds of Iranian rockets aimed at Israeli women and children by people hiding behind their own women and children, a double war crime ignored by the West like all Arab war crimes. That's what the Israelis got when they gave up Gaza, and it's what they'll get if they're ever stupid enough to give up the West Bank. Israel needs to exist because there needs to be a Jewish state. Humanity has proven conclusively over many centuries that it cannot be trusted not to persecute Jews. Jew hatred seems to be written right into our DNA because it just keeps coming back. In universities all over the Western world, Muslim Brotherhood front groups are allowed to spread their anti-Semitic poison unchecked, while anyone defending Israel is shouted down or barred from access altogether because students who've been Islamized don't like free speech. Whenever Israel defends itself from terrorism, we see armies of self-righteous left-wing bubbleheads marching through European cities holding banners that read, "We are all Hamas now," as if that's something to be proud of. If those banners were honest, they would read, "We are all religious hate mongers, racists and murderers now, who put no value on human life because our minds are pickled in a barbaric religion and we are completely insane." Actually, that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? So maybe the last bit could go on a separate banner or something. Or why not simply cut to the chase and put "death to Jews," because that's what you support when you support the Palestinians. You are being used as a hand puppet by the Muslim Brotherhood because you've chosen to believe the lie of the apartheid state without bothering to examine the evidence. You've bought a propaganda campaign Goebbels would have been proud of, and what you're actually doing is supporting an Islamic war of extermination against Jews. And if you measure yourself by the same stringent standards that you left-wing hypocrites love to apply to others, then it follows that you are a racist with blood on your hands. No offence.